Today's lecture will be about the endgames of Fabiano Caruana for obvious reasons. Does anybody know? What's the obvious reason? You! No, not, come on. What's his score against me? You! No. Loses all of his games when he's playing me. Now, why are we talking about Fabiano Caruana today? Anybody? Did you have a real answer? Yeah. What is it? Second in the world? No, he's not second in the world either. He used to be. Anyone? Nobody knows? Mike Hummer knows. No? Okay, you can tell him, Mike.
He'll be moving to St. Louis. Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, Fabiano Caruana is transferring his federation from Italy to the U.S. So he'll be playing in the U.S. Championship, losing to me there. The Olympiad, where I'll be coaching him. And the World Team Championship, where I'll be watching from afar. Although I won't be coaching him either. So the U.S. team will be a little bit stronger. So I thought I would, since it's an endgame lecture, I thought I would talk about Fabiano's best endgames. And we'll start with one where he beats the world's best player and world champion, Magnus Carlsen. Now, as you can tell from this position, what opening did this start out as? Anyone? Yes. French? You're very close. Yes. Italian? That's less close. Yeah. Actually, Italian's close. Italian's actually closer. Yes. Scandinavian? No, now you're going crazy over there. All right. The correct answer, obviously, is the Berlin. There's a Berlin endgame. I mean, Caruana's playing Carlsen. They could both be playing the Berlin because they both play with white and black. Now, this has gone quite well for white because, first of all, white's a pawn ahead. So, yeah, that's pretty good. Usually, black has double pawns on the queen side, but they're gone. Now, white has a beautiful knight on d5. White has 4-3 on the king side. This is very important. If you were here last week for my lecture, where I dressed up as Alejandro Ramirez, you'll remember I talked a lot about Capablanca. And Capablanca said you should always advance your pawns on the side you have a majority. If you cut the board in half, you'll see on the king side, white has 4 pawns to 3, and they have an equal number of pawns on the queen side, which is typical in this opening. So white is going to try to advance his king side pawns, and black, as you can see, is very passive. Now, black has one advantage that grandmasters in particular like quite a bit. You bishop pair. Has the bishop pair. Unfortunately, that bishop on d8 is pretty meek. So, Arj, do you think that bishop on d8 is going to inherit the earth? Yes. Yeah, see, good answer. Well put. Okay, so Fabiano's white. And I like this game for a couple reasons, for Fabiano's sake. One is he's beating Carlsen. The other is he's playing in the Vugar Gashimov Memorial. This was the first one. They also had one this year. One of our world's top players who died at a young age. So having a memorial tournament for him is very nice. Okay, so black played b5 because black doesn't want to sit around and lose. Black wants to get counterplay. Black wants to open the position so the bishops can have their say. Fortunately, after the trade on b5, you'll notice these pawns are, what do we call them? Arjun. Isolated pawns, right. So they're sort of weak, okay? As Meredith discovered today, isolated pawns not so good, okay? So these pawns are by themselves. On the other hand, we've improved our bishop somewhat because we don't have a pawn blocking it. If the game gets really open, the bishops will have their say. Knight e3, which prevents more trades. In the endgame, when you're winning, you want to have as many pawns as possible. If you have 6 pawns to 5, it's likely you'll win. If you have 2 pawns to 1, then it's very hard to win because often what the other side can do is sacrifice a piece for your only remaining pawn, and you'll have rook and knight against rook, or rook and bishop versus rook, which is a theoretical draw. But if there's a lot of pawns on the board, you have a better chance of making a queen. So after knight to e3, the knight's protecting the c4 square, making it hard to play c4. As we all know, c4 is explosive, of course. And you get that joke, Arjun? No? Okay. And also, the knight is protecting the king's side, so it's helping us move our king's side pawns forward. With so many arrows, black is in trouble. Okay, so rook e6, blocking the e pawn maybe we're going to swing over here and take the A pawn. There's no way Caruana is going to see that coming. F4, advancing on the side with the majority. Rook A6, attacking A2. I wonder if he saw it. Rook D2. Now, a lot of lower rated players love to move pawns. If they can move a pawn, they can, especially when it attacks something. But that actually is very weakening. The more forward you move the pawns, the more likely you're going to take them. White doesn't want to move his queenside pawns forward. He doesn't have an advantage over there. That's 2 against 2. He wants to move his kingside pawns forward because he has more pawns than his opponent. Which pawn would become quite weak if white plays A4? Let's call in a random person. Julian. The B3 pawn, which would no longer have any defense. And he would be envious of the A4 pawn, which would be embarrassed on A4, just because of the colors. Okay, joke didn't work out too well, but it's, audience is a little slow today. Okay, I'm not in the South anymore, or am I? Let's see. All right, so he played rook to D2, and now A2 is protected and cannot be attacked again. B3 is protected. The knight on E3 is stopping the advance C4, so it's hard for black to do anything except to wait to lose. They hate to do that. H5, put it in H, right, Julian? Also, as I said earlier in the lecture, but you forgot because it was like 2 minutes ago. I'm not talking to you. You're a very intelligent audience. I'm with people at home. You lazy people, not even coming to the chess club to look at the lecture, just sitting on your couch, eating that terrible food, drinking your sugary drinks, and watching this great lecture, instead of coming to the club at the Kingside Diner and having some great food. Right, Mike Hummer? Exactly. All right, so H5, black wants to trade off all the pawns, then it'll be a draw. The fewer pawns on the board, the greater chances of success for a draw. Takes on H5. Now, Magnus Carlsen called Guinness and said, did I break the world's record for isolated pawns? Okay, unfortunately, he called the wrong Guinness, and he got a case of beer. So, it worked out okay. All right, so now, knight F5, or as I like to say, knife F5, because of the Greek Grandmaster. You only heard of one of them. You've only heard of one Greek Grandmaster. You ever heard of any of them? No. Anybody? No? There's about 15 Greek Grandmasters. You only heard of one of them. What's that? I said Greek. If it ends in ich, that's Serbian, Croatian, Yugoslavia. Okay, the correct answer, obviously, is Vasilius Katronius. And when I was in Moscow in 1984, I think I saw Arjun there. Were you there? You were there, right, Arjun? Vasilius Katronius, who wasn't a grandmaster at the time, he said, Ben, it's not knight F5, it's knife F5. Now, anybody in the audience who has an advanced degree in hyperbolic topology could tell you, white has a very obvious threat here. Anyone? What's white's obvious threat? Yes, as Mike Hummer would say, Arjun's dad. Knight D6 check. Okay, and then forking not only this, but as all of my kids would say, also the pawn. Okay? Also good. You fork the pawn also. Hey, that forks the king and queen. What about that pawn? All right, I hear that a lot. All right, so notice how white took the knight from D5, a great square, and put on another good square, F5. Okay, so we have to stop knight D6 check. Rook G6 check. Knight D6 would be double check, but was not played. King H2. Again, most people like to go sideways and forwards. They don't like to go back. But in this instance, white's goal is to make his king safe. If the king goes to F3, black has bishop C6 check. The king could get in trouble. H2 is very safe. There's no way that black could attack that king. And now white's starting knight D6 check again. Bishop C6. Now knight D6 check doesn't win the bishop on B5 because it's no longer there. Knight D6 anyway. King to B8. F5. Again, white's advancing the majority. Now most of you would be greedy, as would I, and take this pawn on F7. Why didn't it say new move? That's not good.
It didn't say anything?
No, it's supposed to say like...
It was put in before, maybe. Like that just said as a variation.
Really? It's still, I thought it would still do that.
No, you can press your arrow to find out. Like if we go forward, C knight takes us out of the variation.
Wow, I was going to say bishop g3, but I'm pushing the arrow, and I'm not getting anything.
Oh, then that's all they look at.
Okay, so they're suggesting that I thought after bishop h4, black had threats like bishop g3 check, attacking all of white's stuff. That seems sort of annoying. Okay, so instead, white played f5 because getting a queen is good. Rook g8, f6. And now the bishop on d8 once again isn't very good. And we stop the ideas of black getting active. Most people are very greedy. They want to take a lot of pawns. Caruana's like, I'm up a pawn. I have a great knight. My opponent has 4 isolated pawns. All I have to do is stop counterplay. Black's counterplay, bishop h4, bishop g3 check. And white is getting attacked and all his stuff's hanging. f6 sort of prevents that. Bishop b6, trying to activate the bishop the other way. Maybe he'll play c4, bishop g1 mate. Very likely, unless Caruana stops it. Knight c4, I guess that stops it. Okay, so the 1 minute game, you jump over your pawn. No, it doesn't work. All right, rook e8, knight to d6. Why did white play knight d6? Let's call in a random person. Julian. Always repeat. Now we're talking. All right, now he took on f7. He's not afraid of getting mated. c4. Most people would take on c4. It still didn't do it. Very suspicious. Bishop g1 with advantage, because the game is over. All right, let's see. Yeah, it's not doing, I don't know what it's doing. It's acting crazy over here. Okay, so white gave his king extra luft. Even though he's moving to the US, he still likes Germany a little bit. h4. Now his king can go to h3, so bishop g1 check doesn't work. It's check though, that's pretty good. So if this was the beginner breakdown class, bishop g1 check for sure, gotta put him in check. All right, rook g4, attacking the h-pawn. e6, 2 queens is better than 1. If you saw the movie Contact, 2 rocket ships. Okay, e6, bishop e3. Again, black's not interested in taking pawns. He's gonna lose. He wants to checkmate the white king. Bishop e3, attacking the rook. Bishop f4 check with some minor threats. If I was white, I would play a Zwischenzug here. I actually don't know what he played, but I would play bishop e5 check. He might not see he's in check. All right, I got one right. No wonder I beat him real easily, man. Okay, man, I should play for the U.S. All right, man, I gotta call Italy immediately. All right, king a8, rook d8 check. I predict king b7. Yes. All right. Hey, he could have resigned. Come on. Bishop g3, stopping rook g2 check, and stopping rook takes h4. So white's plan has come to fruition. He was trying to advance his majority, and he did a pretty good job. Black's trying to get counterplay with the 2 bishops, but white has good defense. Bishop on g3 basically stops everything. So man, those pawns look pretty good on e6 and f6. c3, rook check. Once again, I predict king a6. Rook c8. If the bishop moves, rook takes c3 looks good. Bishop d5. If you play king to b7, it seems like I have a lot of good moves. I could play rook c7 check or knight d6 check. That looks terrible. So he played bishop d5. That seems like a good idea, taking this. I agree with that. Rook takes c3, bishop to d4. Bishop takes e6. You could play rook c6 check. You could play knight d8, and both bishops are attacked. I'm guessing rook c6 check. Okay, he played bishop to d4, attacking the rook. Rook there. Rook to e4. Rook d2 again. Black's trying to attack the white king with the rook and 2 bishops. No counterplay. Rook d2. Rook takes e6. If rook takes bishop, then rook e2 check. Hey, now it's new variation. What's going on? What? Okay, then rook check, and then some kind of, like I'd probably go here, expecting bishop takes knight, and then, oh, I hate when that happens. I mean, when I'm black, I like it, but not when I'm white. Yeah, that would be fine. Okay, so instead, Caruana played knight to g5, and you'll notice black has a lot of pieces attacked, a few too many. So normally I would predict rook takes f6, but I predict resigns. Okay, I got one right. Yeah, knight g5. So black eventually stopped white's pawns, but lost the bishop as a result. That was a very nice endgame because not only did he beat Carlsen, but he got his pawn majority on the king side going without allowing black too much counterplay. Although that was a lot of counterplay, but he just stopped it all. Carlsen tried hard, but in the end he failed miserably. The lesson is don't try. Right, Kyle? Absolutely. All right. All right, now I'll try to go to the next game, so we'll take a 20-minute break now, because I don't know. You told me to X this out, that'll work perfectly?
No, but it'll work. Okay.
Now what do I do? Click this. How'd that work? That worked pretty well. Okay, now the gawking rabble are always telling me opposite colored bishops is a draw. And as Hikaru Nakamura would say, frankly, ridiculous. Okay, probably he would say that about Caruana playing for the US, but that's a different lecture. Okay, so in this position, we have opposite colored bishops. Caruana is white against the tallest player that I've beaten. Maybe. Yeah, I think so. He wasn't so tall when I beat him, though. Loek von Wely. Okay, and he's been to the chess club before, but it was much funnier when he was detained at JFK and sent back home. That was funnier. Not for him, but. Okay, so here, white is a pawn ahead. Opposite colored bishops would often be a draw, but not with rooks on the board. Okay, so Caruana is white. Rook b8, attacking the pawn. Like Caruana is not going to see that. This is a beginner breakdown. This is real life. Rook b1, and there's a very famous saying which you all know, so I just won't say it. No. Rooks go behind past pawns. Then when the pawns advance, the rook has more scope, and this rook has no Listerine, even though it's green. It's lucky it was green. Otherwise, that joke wouldn't have made sense. Okay, bishop to d2, making b4 not so good. Bishop to e2, attacking the weak pawn. So white wants to win lots of pawns and then play on both sides of the board, advancing his pawns, because that b pawn's not going anywhere. Now black has two problems in this ending, other than the fact that he's down a pawn. The g pawn is weak, and potentially the d6 pawn is weak, if I can attack that. White's only problem is his e4 pawn. Black's going to try to attack that, I assume. Rook b4, I assumed right. Bishop c4. And one of the things you're going to see in this lecture, which isn't very exciting for you, although I enjoy it, it is my lecture, is Caruana is very patient. Okay? He doesn't want to win in 2 moves, doesn't want to win in 4 moves. He wants to put you to sleep. So if my lecture doesn't put you to sleep, his play will. So we got you one way or the other. Caruana, very patient, slowly building his advantages. Not one of the strong suits of Loek von Wely. He likes to mix it up, play complicated chess and confuse his opponent. Caruana wants to play 80, 90 move games, because if you play 90 moves, you might make one mistake. Not Mike Kummer, but some of you. If you play 90 moves, you might make some errors. So the longer the game goes, the more mistakes he thinks his opponent's going to make. And he's not in a hurry because black can't make any threats. Once the bishop's on c4, the rook on b4 is not very good, and there's nothing really for black to attack. White's going to slowly build his position. Now that the bishop is on c4 defending the pawn on b3, this rook can run around and start attacking things. f5, again, black's not very patient. E takes f5. Where'd Julian go? Is he here? He ran away crying? Wow. Lecture's too hard for him. One of my rules, which I tell all my private students, if your opponent plays f5, you'd play e takes f5. It's one of my rules. Here it's sort of simple. Again, g4 pawn's pretty weak. King f6. The rook is coming to take on d6 or g4. And he says, no, you're not going to do that. He plays rook to b8 for two reasons. One is he stops rook a8. More importantly, he wants his bishop to go to b4, defending this pawn. Later, we're going to go to c5 and put pressure. The bishop on d2 isn't very good. On b4 or c5, it defends the d6 pawn. Rook a6, bishop b4 as explained. Bishop to d3, defending his pawn. Now, if he played bishop to d3 earlier, then the rook would take. So now that the bishop's on b4, we have time. Bishop c5, discovered attack on the pawn. Bishop c2. Now we've gone from one pawn ahead to 2 pawns ahead, and white can try to win that g pawn with something like rook to a4. e4, again, not very patient. Black is playing very actively. He's trying to trade pawns off, activate his pieces, and hope that with obviously colored bishops, even if he's down a pawn or two, he has good drawing chances. He doesn't want to wait around to lose. He wants to play actively. Rook a4, again, don't be greedy and take this. Then your b3 pawn is hanging. And now black can get good counterplay on f2. Instead, the rook on a6 isn't doing anything now. Rook goes to a4, e3, the idea of e4, takes. And now it's very hard to defend g4. Black's pawns are disappearing. Defends g4, and now a very nice move with a double threat. Who can find it? White has a fork. It attacks a piece and a square that he wants to go to. Yes, Kyle. Rook e4, tagging the bishop, and I want to play rook e6 check. Saves the bishop, defending his pawn, b4. Get your bishop out of there so I can check and take your d pawn. Okay, and white went from 1 pawn ahead to 3 pawns ahead. Okay, does anybody know what time it is? Time to resign, but Von Wely doesn't resign. He's a bitter ender like me. Okay, never resign, fight. Bishop b8, rook g6. If the rook goes somewhere else, we can take the pawn on g3. So, well, if black doesn't trade rooks and moves his rook away, he's going to lose his g4 pawn. So we're going to get to this ending where white has a lot of extra pawns. And d6 is nothing to sneeze at. We're threatening bishop c4 check. Okay, now some of you are like, wait, why can't I play rook d8? That looks pretty safe. After bishop here check, you might get checkmated. For example, checkmate. Or king e8 loses, probably for more than one reason, but I'll play the reason that I see. I can't go there. And I think I'm winning a rook, right? Looks like you can't defend your rook anymore. Okay, so d6 was a great move. It threatens bishop c4 winning the rook, and it threatens bishop c4 mating you. So black is forced to trade rooks, and white has 3 passed pawns. It's hard to stop them all. And actually, they get to a theoretical endgame. You can't take the bishop because of g7, and white's going to queen. And he gets this theoretical ending with 2 pawns against 0, and we have a rule for this. If the pawns are very close together, it's a draw. Here, the pawns are really far apart. That's actually good because the king and bishop have to stay on one of the pawns, and the white king just comes over. If the pawns are next to each other, then we can blockade. For example, if this was here, this would be an easy draw. There's nothing white can do. Surprisingly, even if the pawns run f4 and g4 right next to each other, it's still a draw. When they're close together, it's a draw. When they're really far apart, black's king and bishop can't go both directions. He has to keep his king stopping one, the bishop stopping the other. Where do you think the white king goes? To the black king or to the black bishop? The black bishop, because my king can't go next to your king, unless you cheat a lot. Okay, so that's what he does. Again, you can't play king takes bishop because I queen. And the king walks to the bishop. And what did Von Wely do here? He resigned because I'm going to play king here. I'm going to push my pawn. You're going to sacrifice your bishop for my pawn, and I'll have a bishop and pawn against nothing. So I like that endgame because a lot of people are under the misconception when it's opposite colored bishops, it's always a draw. Okay, now you've heard the famous rule, all rook and pawn endings are drawn, which is the opposite of my rule. They're all winning. So
It was still a G pawn and H pawn, then it would have been a draw. Because
if it's G and H, it's a draw. F and G, it's a draw. Yeah, because the bishop can always sacrifice for the two pawns if you set up the right position. This is pretty funny. This was a Marshall. This is Caruana Aronian from Zurich last year, and they traded to this position. Normally in the Marshall, black's a pawn down, and here it's equal material, so you would think it's an easy draw. Black has the two bishops, black's not down a pawn, but white has several advantages. One is the greatest bishop ever, and the other is these pawns are both isolated. The third advantage is my rook is really great. I have a lot of good squares to go to, threatening your pawns and your bishops. So because white has the better pawn structure, white has the better rook, white's bishop is on d4, he actually has an advantage. And one of the reasons that black lost this game is he thought this would be a relatively easy draw. He's playing the Marshall down a pawn, he wins his pawn back, has the two bishops, he's like, what's the problem? Well, he soon finds out what the problem is. Rook a6, most of you see the threat. Some of you are like, why doesn't he play pawn takes rook? That's what you were thinking at home, admit it. Admit it. Yep, and somebody's like, oh my God, I was thinking that. No, the pawns don't move backwards. Okay, bishop to e7, very suspicious, but safe. Knight to f1. Why did white play knight to f1?
Reroute to E3.
Reroute to e3, putting pressure on the pawn on d5. b4. Now, if you remember the previous game, and you don't, I said when you're in trouble, you trade all the pawns and nobody can beat you. There's no pawns on the board. He's not going to win with a rook and knight against a rook. So b4, trading pawns. Bishop to d3. How many of you want to take this pawn? It's free. Yeah? Gets any noisier in here, a funeral's going to break out. Knight takes d5, check, winning the knight.
No, you have better.
You have better? Wow, bishop takes rook? Yeah, but I can't see that. That's too hard. Bishop e4 check, now we're talking. Okay, so Mike Kummer suggests the improvement, bishop takes rook. So Caruana plays rook a5, attacking the d pawn again, and they trade. Bishop to d8, attacking the rook. Rook takes d5, falls into the same trick. Bishop e4 check. Plays rook to a8. f6. What's wrong with that move? Anyone? Never play f6. Exactly. Okay, so that'll teach Aronian to play chess. Again, knight takes d5 loses, except now I'm right. Bishop e4 check. I tell my students you shouldn't keep your king on the same color as your opponent's bishop. Problem is, black's got two bishops, so that's hard to do. You got to sort of play around the squares in the middle. You know, like you're playing Go. You know what I'm talking about? Yeah. Yeah. Otherwise, the bishop's going to check you. Now here, the white king is obviously safer on a dark square for the simple reason that white has a dark squared bishop, so that can block a lot of the checks. Okay, he played f3 because black played f6, so they hate my lecture. Okay, but that stops bishop e4 check, prepares king f2. The d5 pawn is a goner. It's hard to say that in the long run. Bishop e7, trading rooks. White's like, no, I don't trade. White knows the very important rule. Never trade. Okay? And also, if we trade, it'll be a draw. And most importantly, if you don't believe in my crazy rules, and even sometimes I don't, although I usually do, This is the greatest rook ever. It's on the open file, attacking everything, and it's E for excellent. This rook just sitting on E8 the whole game. That's like a might come or bishop on C8 that can't move. It's always been on E8. Rook A7, my rook's on the 7th rank. That's exactly where I want it. Bishop to D6, rook D7, bishop A3 hiding, and finally he wins the pawn. It's not so easy to win. How are we going to queen our C pawn? It'll take a long time, and black has a lot of pieces that'll stop it. So it's still tough to win. King to G8. Probably white doesn't want to have black have the 2 bishops. So if white could play like bishop C5 check and trade bishops, it'll be easier to win. If black's always having his 2 bishops, that's not so simple. So king G8, H4, gaining space on the king side. Bishop C1, threatening the knight. Knight G4, attacks the rook, attacks the bishop, attacks the knight. And now finally black made what, the first rook move in the whole endgame? G4. White's gaining space on the king's side. It's hard to queen his pawn right now. And again, Caruana is not in a hurry. He wants to gain space for 2 reasons. It's good to gain space, and also for his king safety. If black starts attacking, like in the last game we saw with Carlsen, white king needs some squares to go to. Rook A2, king G3, there's a square to go to. Might comer.
What if before rook a2 you play bishop f4?
Bishop F4, double question mark.
Okay.
No, I'm teasing. Yeah. Well,
And
bishop
prevents, you know,
F4 is what I would have played, so I agree. Normally I would say knight D3, but I'm sort of worried about rook A2 check. Maybe I shouldn't because of bishop F2, but I'm still worried. Bishop F4 to me is the obvious move, because white played G4, you want your bishop on F4. So exactly. That's why you're going to play this Sinquefield Cup and not this Aronian guy. How has he done the last 2 Sinquefield Cups? Not very well. All right, so rook A2, king G3, rook back to A6. White slowly improves his position. White really wants to trade bishops. If black has the 2 bishops, he can create a lot of threats, like we saw in the Carlsen game, but now he's forced to trade bishops. The bishop has nowhere to go. Now, white's king is perfectly safe. There's no way black's going to attack. And now that the bishop pair is gone, we're ready to advance our pawn. Okay, and actually, I would say black's king is in a little trouble because of this rook on the 7th rank. Okay, stopping C4. And white's just slowly improving his position. And now C4, very tricky tactical move, confusing the audience. If bishop takes C4, knight B7, attacking the rook, attacking the bishop, and by the way, I got knight D6 check just in case. So not good for black. Okay, probably Aronian overlooked C4, thinking he had the pawn stopped. Bishop to A8, a fantastic square for the bishop. Did you want to suggest another move? No. Okay, bishop A8, rook check, knight E6. White's winning on both sides of the board. White has a better king, a better rook, a better knight, a better minor piece, and he's a pawn ahead. Now we have a direct attack on the G7 pawn. Very easy to stop. Rook A3, threatening. Rook F3, checkmate. Man, that Aronian's tough. Just when you think you had him. Okay, and Caruana didn't see the mate, so he resigned. No. He played rook check, obviously, king H8. And now king F5, the king goes to G6, F7, H6. Both sides are getting mated, but mainly black is. White's king is escaping. Rook G6, winning all of black's remaining pawns. Hate when that happens. Okay, and black has no pawns. Rook F3 check, knight F4. If we move the king, black could win the G4 pawn, which I'm sure is still winning for white, but why give the pawn away? Bishop takes, King G5, threatening knight G6 check. Black's only hope is stalemate, but you can't give the rook and the bishop away, so there's no stalemates. Man, Caruana loves having two connected passed pawns. That's his favorite thing. I always hated having that, but now I'm starting to like it. Knight H3 is going to play knight G5, knight H7, rook F8 mate. Yeah, I was right. Okay, Black doesn't want to get mated, and so he did the only thing he could do to avoid mate. He resigned. Well, okay, everything wins here. If I turn the computer on, it'll explode and the lecture will end. So say like White's up 33 or something. So Black can't move. White has a million ways to win. Putting the rook on the 7th rank with knight F6 check. Playing G7 would win. Rawr, threatening rook F8. So that was a good game. Just like the Carlsen game, Caruana advanced his majority. Eventually, by winning so many of Black's kingside pawns, he changed the majority from the queen side to the king side. And that's called trading advantages. Sometimes you're checkmating somebody and they give a piece away to not get checkmated, and you don't take that piece because you're trying to checkmate them. But if you took the piece, you'd be a piece ahead in the endgame and win easily. So just because you have one advantage, sometimes you trade it for another one and you can win just as easily. White had a pass pawn on the C file, but he took so many kingside pawns, his majority actually changed to the king side, a 2-pawn majority. This game actually reminds me a lot of the Carlsen game. Oh, I gotta flip the board. I think it's impossible. Okay, there we go. All right, this is a game he played last year against your favorite Russian player, Nepomniachtchi, and took the bishop back. Now here, we see some bad pawn structures. Okay, isolated pawns, doubled pawns, horrible. But actually, Black has a big advantage here. And there's actually several advantages, but the most telling is this bishop on G2. That reminds me of the Mike Kummer bishop on C8 that never gets out. That bishop on G2, it's not really going to participate. And this particular position, A4 is pretty weak, but I don't see how White's going to attack A5. So potentially, Black's going to win a pawn. Black's also attacking the knight, obviously. And that bishop on G2 is never going to take anything. Since the center is closed and those pawns can't move, the knight's just better than the bishop. So Black has a better minor piece, and White's pawns are actually weaker because White has more weak pawns. Here, we all have the same C pawns and A pawns, but we have an isolated pawn on E4 here. So Black has so many advantages, he actually won pretty easily. Queen E3, defending the knight, and if I take on A4, I can take on C5. So that was a good move. Knight to F6, the knight's not good on H7, right Meredith? Terrible on H7 on the side, horrible. Now we're getting back into the center. Knight F3, queen to D6. Again, Black is in no hurry. Black is defending his pawns, and he knows eventually he'll win the A4 or C4 pawn by maneuvering his knights around. And the most important part of the ending is White has no counterplay. If I said, what's White's plan? Defending all of his pawns? Okay, what is White going to take? Can White attack the Black king? Does White have a majority? No. So White's going to defend, 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 and Caruana's in no hurry. Knight E1, knight F8, knight D3 attacking the pawn on C5, knight E6 defending the pawn on C5. And now White's sort of out of ideas now. And here comes Black attacking all those weak pawns. C4 is attacked, A4 is attacked. Knight B2, just where you want your knight. Now when I was at when I was at the regular nationals last weekend in Tennessee, I noticed whenever you attack something, the kids always defend it in the most passive way possible. They're like, yay, I didn't lose a pawn. And I'm like, you just trapped your piece for 40 moves. So even though White doesn't lose a pawn, that's a terrible knight. It defends 2 pawns, and there's no active play. So temporarily it's okay, but in the long run, white doesn't have any plan. You don't want to have inactive pieces. So if I was white, I would cheat and play knight to d5, because cheating is the in thing now, right? We got, Feller just got reinstated. We got the guy in India. We got, Borislav Ivanov. Come on. Cheating, yeah, cheating is, that's the way you do it. Okay, yeah, now that Brady was fined approximately $1 million, I feel really bad for him. And also the Patriots. Let's have a moment of silence. I don't think the Patriots can afford $1 million. What a terrible punishment. Okay, all right. So that knight on b2 is terrible. All right, so knight f8, the knight's being rerouted. Where? I don't know. Probably f6. That's where I would go. Okay, and he went to f6. I was right for once. Now, the knight's attacking. Everything in white's position is attacked, and white's defending. Bishop f3, that defends. Queen d7, attacking the a4 pawn again. Queen c2. So white defends everything, but it's just horrible. The most passive position ever. Knight e8, trying to go to d6, take that c4 pawn. And he did. And white defended. Okay, and what would Lisa Simpson say about the bishop on d3? I hope you're saying it at home. Anyone? No, she would say a blockaded bishop is of little value. And that bishop is really blockaded. It can't do anything. King f8, again, Caruana is in no hurry. King e7, improving his king. f6 is a good move, as I always say, right, Mike? Because we have a pawn chain, pawns are all defended, and white can't make any threats. He's just waiting to lose. Okay, and now black decides f5 is the winning idea, puts his king over safe on the queen side, and white's had enough. White knows if f5 comes, his own king might get open, and the bishop on d3 is defending e4 and c4. So he finally cracks under the pressure, decides to get active, and see if he can get perpetual check or trade enough pawns. Do we have a question? So queen f2, putting pressure on f6 and c5. And he takes one of the pawns. Check. Queen a1, threatening the pawn on c5, c3 I should say, putting white's king under some pressure, and also we're ready to advance our pawn and make a queen. Now, if we look at the minor pieces, the knight on d6 looks pretty reasonable. Bishop on d3, not so much. Caruana was very happy to trade off the knights, leaving white with this terrible piece. Queen d5, trying to get some checks in. And then f5, threatening. Queen h1, checkmate, with advantage. So he takes, defending the mate. Plays c5. If you take the pawn, I have several ways to win. I can trade queens and then play knight takes bishop. Or I could check and take the bishop with either piece. So he didn't do that. c5, attacking the knight. e4, threatening. It's the same threat. Queen h1 mate. So he didn't want to get mated. Bishop takes e4. I only see one winning move, so I assume he played it. I only see one winning move. Mike?
Queen g4 check.
That's what I see. Hope he played it. We look silly otherwise. There we go. And now black's up a piece, and he has a mating attack. But white has perpetual for sure. Okay, queen d3, not even trying to check him. I would try. I would have played queen d8 check, and I would have checked him at least 4 or 5 times. Well, 3 times? 2 times? Yeah, I would have checked him twice. Check. Check, and then I would resign. All right. But 2 checks is pretty good. Okay, he played queen d3, knight takes c5, knight b7, black's up a piece. White decided not to resign for some reason. Seems like resigning is a good idea. And A4. And now he resigned, I think. No, he didn't. Wow. Okay, and here he resigned. The game would continue like this if he didn't resign. And most of you could win this position with black. Most of you, right? Possibly all of you. Possibly. So I like that endgame because Caruana wasn't in a hurry. His king was on the king's side, moved it to the queen's side, and then pushed his king's side pawns, and white's position was too passive. Mainly because the white square bishop was terrible. I thought your camera was making a lot of noise there. That's good. Okay, and last but not least, again, another Berlin, this time against Michael Adams. And again, unlike the Carlsen game, Adams actually has his queenside pawns. Amazing. In the Carlsen game, one of those pawns was missing, so white was a pawn ahead. And here, white's going to win the same way he won against Carlsen, push his kingside pawns. It used to be well known the best Berlin player in the world, for black especially, was Kramnik, but now I think that title goes to Caruana. He plays well with white and black in the Berlin, and he has a lot of experience. Here, just like in the Carlsen game, the knight's on d5, and white has a kingside majority. Unlike the Carlsen game, black has a queenside majority, and the difference is, at some point, black can play b5, but white doesn't have to take it. Again, very patient. And when b5 happens, the Carlsen game, Caruana just took it and said, you have isolated pawns. Here, the knight on d5 needs to be protected, so white only has one reasonable move, defending his c4 pawn. b3. Yeah, and he's like, you can't do anything. I'm going to defend that. These doubled pawns don't scare me. They're not going to become passed. And I'm going to push on the king side and get my passed pawn. Now the risk is, if all the pawns are traded, sometimes when you win a piece for your passed pawn, you still don't win. And here would be like rook and knight against rook. You wouldn't win. So if black can somehow trade all the pawns, he can still draw. A3, trying to get counterplay. He's hoping to win this pawn later and have his own passed pawn. King e4 defends the knight. Now the knight's defended about as many times as possible. If this move was played in beginner breakdown, I think Mike Hummer would leave screaming. He'd be like, why'd you pin your own knight? Terrible. But now the knight's super defended, and it was already pinned. So by having 4 pieces defend the knight, it's pretty safe. b4, h4 getting our majority going. Rook d2. I like rook d2 because it defends the second rank, so you're never going to lose your a pawn. And it also says to black, what are you going to do? Black is very passive because of the fantastic center control by the knight and the rook. And I should say the king. Okay, g5. Okay, now if black plays rook h8 to win this a pawn, Caruana's already stopped that. No counterplay. And that's what he did anyway. Breaking the pin, stopping rook f1 check, and white's getting his majority going on the king side. Takes the queen side pawn, and the rest is very easy. I like knight d5. Again, he's not being greedy, he just wants to stop counterplay. He doesn't want his king to get in trouble by these 3 pieces, so he just plays knight d5 and says, well, your rook can't get in there, you can't do anything, I'm threatening this, I'm threatening this, you're down 2 pawns, and you can't even check me. Takes, takes. Mike Hummer approved trading when you're ahead material. Okay, now, this is the move Capablanca would approve of, advancing your majority. 3 against 3 on the queen side, 2 against 1 on the king side, f6. Getting a queen is a good idea. Now, in this position, Michael Adams played GF. If he plays rook takes G6, what would white do? How does white crash through and make a queen? F7, threatening F8. And now black has to give his rook away for the passed pawn. Adams didn't like that, so he played GF. King F5, defending his G pawn, attacking the F pawn. And now, most people in the class would play King F7, G7, G8, and hope to win that black doesn't get enough counterplay on the queen side. But actually, it's better to queen without letting the guy sacrifice his rook for the pawn. First, G7. Black doesn't want to take yet. He wants white to waste tempo. And by the way, I see this a lot, especially with the kids I'm teaching. When they're going to play G7 and King F7 in similar positions, a lot of times they move their king first. Your king is not the one that's promoting. You got to play G7 so the other rook can't move away somewhere. So whenever your pawn is advancing and your king is helping it, you always move the pawn first. Maybe you'll queen it without the guy doing anything. So King F7 would be a terrible move. G7's much better. Not only is white going to play King F7, white's going to play another move which black seemed to forget about. Or maybe it just didn't matter. He played C5, and now we can queen without letting black sacrifice the rook for the pawn. Somebody whispered it pretty loud. Rook F5 check with the idea of rook G5. Then we're going to queen for nothing. And in fact, it would be a very interesting game if white just played king here and queened, because then black would get counterplay also. Black would sacrifice. That's not clear at all that white's winning. But this is very clear that white's winning. Rook F5 check. The king moves, rook G5. We're going to be a queen ahead. After rook F5, Caruana dropped the mic and left. So Adams was forced to resign. Okay, and since Caruana is now going to play for the US, another victory for the colonies over Great Britain. Finally. Man, it took a long time. Yeah. And of course here, black resigned. So in all those endgames, we saw Caruana with pawn majorities, usually on the king side at the end, advancing them and using his king. The one big mistake a lot of people make in the endgame is they don't move their king up enough, because in the opening, they know their king is supposed to stay safe. In the endgame, your king is very useful. You need to move your king up. And as Mike Kummer said in Beginner Breakdown, when black had a king and a bishop, he said, that bishop's terrible. We're worried about the king. If the black king moves up, that's going to be good. So white prevented that. In this game, white's king moved forward and more forward, defending the pawn on G7, and black had no chance. So if Caruana really starts improving his endgame like you see here, someday he might even the score against me. No, he won't. No.